We are really happy to have with us Eeva Mägi. She is an award-winning Estonian filmmaker known for her experimental and surreal approach to documentary language. She also makes fiction, and she is the director of the short film Lembri Uudu, which is her first independent film after graduation back in 2017, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it has its international premiere at Doc Leipzig and has later participated in many other festivals since then. It is also a story part of our 6-volume community. So you can actually see this short film in our website. And Fernando Chaves, on the other hand, is a Costa Rican independent journalist, artistic director of the International Film Festival of Costa Rica. Currently is the curator of the Museum of Contemporary Art and Design of Costa Rica, and is also the writer of The March of the Trees, a text about the film Time in the Garden by the Georgian filmmaker Salome Hashi, that is also part of the creative documentary column in our last volume community. So thank you both for being here, taking the time to be here and also like to share your thoughts. Today, we will be discussing 2 documentaries that share the quality of being open for the spectator's participation and interpretation. In one hand, we have Lembri Uudu, proposes a version of a kolkhoz through the memories of several people who inhabited one in Soviet times. And in the other one, we have Time in the Garden, that narrates through contemplation and silence about an extremely disturbing and complex situation, the massive extraction of trees for personal purposes. In both cases, the directors move away from imposing any particular ideology and instead allow a more open and sensible exploration of topics for the viewer. This reminds me of a quote from a Serbian filmmaker, Dragan Elčić. I'm not sure if I'm pronounced that well, but that says, the role of creative documentary is to elevate reality with imagination. So I would like to begin this conversation by asking both of you, at this time in your careers, what would you say characterizes your approach to and understanding of documentary filmmaking? And maybe Eeva, you can start.
Well, thank you for the introduction and all these thoughts. Well, this is actually a pretty difficult question because when I was making Lembri Uudu, it was my first independent film after film school, and I had no idea how filmmaking goes or what I'm supposed to do when I'm shooting. And so it was just, everything happened by accident. I just followed my intuition. But after that, I made another short documentary, and I had the same approach, that I staged everything. I had a pre-written script, and I followed the script. And basically, I just staged my own fantasies mixed with the reality. And then now I just finished my first feature-length documentary. And it was totally different because these characters contacted me and they asked me to make a film about them. And now I realized that it's a very, very difficult to make a film if this idea hasn't come to you like through cosmos or just like it's just something that comes to you, like nobody's asking you to make it. It's just cosmos or some divine something that tells you to make a film about that. And then it's kind of a natural process, even though you're staging everything. But very harsh for me is to make a film when someone is asking to make a film and just to observe real life. So in that sense, I might have a very different approach because I don't know how to observe real life or how to document real life. I only am able to make my fantasies real based on real life. So yeah, it's very difficult to say what is the correct approach in documentary filmmaking, because I think all kind of approaches are correct, but my approach is very much about staging. But maybe I would quote, I just heard a podcast with Werner Herzog, and he also quoted someone else who said that in his documentaries, he's modifying facts in such a way that they resemble with reality more than with truth.
Wow.
So it's just modifying facts, and it's like doesn't actually matter if it's reality or truth. But also if you're making documentaries, you're using fantasy and staging everything, then you'll get to understand that reality and truth can be like totally different things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to make documentaries about my own truth, mixed with fantasies and surrealism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that's a really honest approach. I mean, that's the least as an author that I guess you can do. Be honest with with yourself, and like you said, like if it's a process of vice versa, somebody asks you do this story, it's harder to connect to that because it didn't came through this like I don't know, like you call it cosmos. It's inspiration for some other people, but also like your experiential time in this earth. I guess it will point some stories and some others no. So
yeah, but it's also very egocentric in a way that I'm like staging my own stories and my own reality, and I'm actually not able to reflect other people's stories who are not related to me anyhow. So it's I don't know if it's good or bad.
yeah.
I'm really struggling with making documentaries about people who I don't know and I'm not connected to them. So this is difficult. So I lack empathy, maybe.
I don't know. It could be, well, that's a harsh approach to yourself, but I think it's interesting to hear that perspective, that it could be also egocentric. But yeah, because it's easy when I'm working on my own, I guess, than as a collective or trying to tell the story of somebody else. You interpret the story of somebody else. I guess it takes more of you. I want to know what Fernando thinks about this.
Well, as I listened to you, I was thinking about obviously, of all the theorizing that has been developing over the past few years around what constitutes a non-fiction approach to filmmaking and so on. And of course, we could take like the philosophical or aesthetic approach to this question, but I also think it is a matter of simply, I mean, I've been watching films for my entire life, and I've been watching them professionally for around 10 years or 12. So it's been really interesting to see how different approaches to nonfiction filmmaking have been sort of infiltrating many different practices by artists around the world, even in regions like Central America, where the practice of documentary filmmaking was more grounded in the sense of this kind of film being a political intervention in society, and that it had a political and social and even ideological responsibility. And that, of course, had a very important moment in history, in the history of all of our countries, obviously influenced by the theorizing and the filmmaking practices that were taking place in South America, third cinema and so on. But it's been really interesting to see how the diversity and also just the power, the emotional and intellectual power that the vast diversity of the vast landscape of current nonfiction filmmaking has been influencing artists and filmmakers in our region. So it's been really interesting to see how different concepts of what a documentary film is and can be have changed very quickly over the past few years. And obviously, this is also a result of just the fact that through the internet and so on, we have access to a lot of films from many different times in the history of film that speak to this this volatile and ever-changing aspect that nonfiction filmmaking or documentary filmmaking has. So answering your question, like what characterizes my approach or understanding of documentary filmmaking in the present is the sense that it can do anything, the sense that at this moment in history, we have access to so many different strands of nonfiction filmmaking and to so many theories and to so many artistic practices and to so many ways of exhibition and of connecting with audiences that filmmakers have the opportunity to explore what they can do and push the boundaries of the form towards new places that speak to what Eeva was referring to, quoting Herzog, as this sense of truth more than reality. Because obviously reality is at the moment very splintered, very confusing, very overwhelming, and perhaps is, and this might sound a little antiquated and so on, but I think that perhaps traditional forms of filmmaking can no longer respond to the intensity and just the confusion that we're living in at the present moment. So I think the evolution of nonfiction filmmaking, especially in countries that didn't have access to the tools of filmmaking before, or spaces for exhibition, this evolution shows us that it is just a very exciting moment to be working with this form, and also speaking from my experience, my professional experience, of showing it to audiences who perhaps are not used to certain ways of expression in filmmaking, but that are happy to accept these new voices.
Thank you for your comments on this. And I wanted to ask you, since we are ask Eeva about what motivated you to make this documentary, Lembri Uudu. I just want to know a little bit of the context there, if you can give us.
Yeah, it's actually a long story, and as it's Friday night here and I'm drinking wine, so I can be very talkative. So just interrupt me when I'm talking too much. But yeah, as I said, these ideas come to me through Cosmos, or somehow they just come to me. But mostly they'll come to me through my dreams. And well, actually, I spent my childhood in this village where we shot Lembri Uudu, and where this man, because Lembri Uudu is used to be a real character, now he's living somewhere else. He used to be a real character, but I never met him, but I only heard stories about him because he was such a vivid person in this village. So even after he passed away, everybody kept on talking about him. So he was something like you heard about every day. And when I spent summers with my grandmother, then I always heard about Lembri Uudu, like in this situation, Lembri Uudu would have done that, or he said that, or some jokes or something. But I didn't think about it. It was just like there until I had a dream. And even after that dream, I didn't think about Uudu, but somehow this dream stayed with me for years. And I had a dream that I was in my grandmother's place, and there's this apple tree in the garden, and there was this human bird, and he fell down the apple tree, fell off, and then he started walking, and he broke his wing because he was this human bird, and he was like the same size as we are. And he was walking through the village and he was dragging his broken wing behind him. And I don't know, somehow I remembered this dream, and there was something about this dream. And then later on, I read a book by José Millás. He's a Spanish writer, and there was a short story that had a sentence that sometimes it takes time for a person to realize he's actually dead. And then I read this sentence, and then suddenly everything was so clear. I made a connection with this person in my dream, this human bird. And then I made a connection with Lembri Uudu, that it's Lembri Uudu who hasn't realized that he's actually dead, and he keeps on flying around the village, like haunting people with his jokes and memories and being present all the time. And then I made this connection that in my dream, this man had broken his wing, so he couldn't fly away. So it's this Lembri Uudu's soul who's like flying around the village and still keeps haunting people's memories. But it's haunting is a wrong word because he's actually like the essence why they're still, not the essence why they're still living, but he somehow is still so huge part of their everyday life. So yeah, through the dream, and then through these stories about Lembri Uudu, and through this one sentence, I realized that this is the film I have to do.
Oh, so interesting and beautiful. That is from a dream that the motivation comes from. And because it's actually something that relates to what we talk a lot in Wimblu, that is the role that landscapes have in one's life, in the sense that our understanding and interpretation of those landscapes we live on are actually a reflection of our inner landscapes. So there's a connection always there. And like you said, you spend time of your childhood in Pakla, I believe is how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
Where is based this story. I wonder, and while I was looking at the film, what is your relationship with this place, and how, I mean, besides that you live there, and how was it transformed when you made this film?
Well, it's part of my life and part of my childhood, and I didn't only spend summers there, I spent like all holidays and vacations and so on. So it was a huge part of my life. And actually, when I was shooting, we weren't yet shooting, I was like doing pre-work to prepare for the shooting. And then I visited all these people and the characters and talked about Lembri Uudu. And then I realized that actually this Soviet Union occupation and kolkhoz had a huge role there, because when I was a child, I was just part of it. Well, the Soviet Union collapsed and there wasn't kolkhoz anymore, but I never thought about it as a child, because it was just a normal way of being, that you had these tractor drivers and all the cows were taken to one place, and like it was like a community thing. So everybody took care of the animals and shared everything, and you never needed any money to pay for the tractor driver. Just a bottle of vodka was enough. And it was like this reality, but actually it was the aftermath of kolkhoz, what I experienced, that they used to be one. And it's my grandmother is from an older generation. So she very hardly survived this Soviet Union, because she was a daughter of a gulag. So everything was taken away from them, and she was forced to work for the kolkhoz. But there were people who were born in like 50s or even 60s, and even if their parents might not have suffered from the Soviet Union that much as my grandmother, so for them it was like a natural way of living. They liked it. It was like fine to be a tractor driver or a mechanic or or milking cows. They loved it because it's part of being alive and just way of earning money and existing, and there was nothing wrong with that. And I grew up with the same mentality somehow. But I knew these stories of my grandmother and what happened to her family and what happened to her. So she wasn't like very, very fond of Soviet Union or the Colcos. But during that time, when I was preparing my script for Lembri Uudu, I realized that actually there are people who truly enjoyed the Soviet Union and the Colcos and the regime, and they were part of it. And actually that they are missing Lembri Uudu is also that they are missing this Colcos. But I wouldn't say there's a difference. They are not missing the occupation or the Soviet regime. They're just actually missing community because this village is dying out. They had like good times with Uudu, with the Colcos, and now it's all gone. But it's not that the regime, they're missing the regime, it's just they're missing entertainment and other people. But yeah, I somehow understood all these things that seemed to be so normal when I was a child. I don't know if it made any any pointer.
Yeah, no, it's totally, and that's one of the reasons this short film is part of this volume, which is under the theme of community. I remember feeling like when I first saw the movie, you as a Western that never experienced any war or any conflict as such, I saw it, and then I kind of went and delved a little bit about the topic and the Colcos, what does it mean, and also like listening now. Is really complex, you know, to actually all the relationships that were in like portrayed through their dreams. It's really complex to see or determine what they are missing. Like you said, like they don't miss like a regime. They miss actually just those relations that were in that case under that context. But it's not about it's about the people, you know. So I really appreciate that comment. And I wanted to ask Fernando, from the viewer's perspective, how do you feel the relationship between the directors and the places in both films manifests, even though that relationship is not explicit in either of them?
Well, I mean, obviously, as a first-time viewer, you don't necessarily have the context that you need in order to approach that question. But once you start reading about the film and reading interviews and rewatching the film and so on, I guess you start getting a sense of why this filmmaker in particular approached this landscape, this human landscape and this natural landscape as they did. And obviously, I one as a viewer that doesn't have the access to the kind of life stories that would explain or that would give context to how this problem or this particular situation is being portrayed. However, once you get sort of in the wavelength of the film, you start feeling the rhythms and the way that the camera moves or doesn't move, the way that the characters are portrayed or approached, just like the overall rhythm of the whole piece. And in this sense, I was watching Eva's film. I was thinking about the sense of lived history, the sense of the layering of memories and human experiences that give shape and character and content and soul to a place, and the way that that requires a sense of empathy, like Eva said. She said that she doubted that she had that sense but I think that she definitely does as an artist. Just because of the way that she approaches these characters' relationships between them and what surrounds them. And I find that very moving because it's a way of validating those memories and of giving a moment for these voices and these experiences to extend their arms toward us as viewers and to welcome us, if only for a few minutes, into their lives. And I find that very special. I've always regarded film as a space for encounter, as a space for exchange, for dialogue, for meeting the other at a place where they are very vulnerable, although they are not present, obviously. But in many ways, that they are sharing their lives with you as a viewer. So I find that very special, and obviously that requires, like I said before, a sense of empathy and a sense of being able to capture that multi-layered history that that inhabits every space. And I think Eva's film does that beautifully.
Thank you so much, Fernando. It's such a relief to hear that I have empathy because I've been struggling with these feelings.
No, I mean, I see where you come from. I guess I see what you mean in terms of being afraid of not being able to listen to these stories. But the way that you were saying that that you became more aware of the many different feelings that life in a kolkhoz evoked. I mean, that takes a certain degree of empathy, certainly, because obviously there is the experience that you lived during that time, the facts and the history that is later on relayed through textbooks and you know, school system and your country's culture after the Soviet Union and so on. But obviously, those lived experiences explain things differently because people live them differently. And like you said, perhaps some of them miss that period of their lives for some reason. And perhaps others regard it as a nightmare. And that's the same for every human experience. And just being able to put that in a film, I think is very special. And I think it requires empathy and courage and patience and generosity.
Okay, thank you so much for these comments. Now that we are in that same line, I wanted to ask Eva. In Lembri Uudu, the interviews with the characters build sort of a new imaginary from memory. You know, like this is what Fernando was mentioning. Like these stories create a new imaginary about a memory of the kolkhoz that is not in textbooks or in any encyclopedia, which is related to our understanding at Wimblu of creative documentary as a language that builds new imaginaries, new meanings, since allows the imagination and subjectivity of the narrator and the participants to be part of the process. That's why I also believe that it's beautiful that all this came from a dream. And I just want to hear, Eva, if you can tell us about the experience of creating this script and directing the people in the movie to act in front of the camera as if there was like a ghost in front of them. How was that process?
Well, I prepared for 2 years. So I knew all these stories my grandmother told me about Lembri Uudu. And then when I had this dream and the idea that I want to make a film about it, then I first talked to my grandmother, and she like recommended me people from the village who I could contact that who knew Uudu very well. And then I contacted these people, and most of them I knew before because, as I already said, I spent my childhood there. And then I visited them, and actually I think it was a very like big advantage that I was from the village and I knew them and they knew me. So they were very friendly and they wanted to talk about their life, and mainly they were friendly because someone was visiting them and like interested in their life, because recently in this village like nothing's happening. So these people are actually lonely, and this is always the case, that when you're lonely, then if someone's interested in your life and they knew, then you're, well, it depends on the person, but you might be happy. So I visited them and we talked about their life and their memories with Uudu and what kind of jokes. Mainly it was about jokes, that what kind of jokes you can remember, what Uudu used to tell or what he was doing, because he was doing very strange things. So that was our main topic, and I visited very many people, and during the process, unfortunately, few of them passed away. And then I collected all these stories, and then I wrote the script. I connected with the vision, that the way that I wanted to tell the story, that there's a spirit floating around the village and like visiting everybody. And then I had this idea that they somehow should talk to Uudu. I can't actually remember why I had this feeling, or that's the main thing, but I can't remember. I'm sorry. So, but yeah, I had this idea that they have to meet Uudu, and then I was struggling with that because they were so used to me, and then we went there with the film crew, that there was this sound guy and DOP and everybody, so I understood that they are not that comfortable anymore. And they are used to talk to me. So, and what they started doing when we were shooting, and I was telling them to look directly to the camera as this would be Uudu and pretend talking to Uudu, then they felt uncomfortable and they right away started to talk to me like they were facing me instead of facing camera. So what I did is that I hide myself behind the wall or behind the door. And I was talking to them as Uudu. And I was like, hey, Elga, how's your life? Tell me about this. You remember this thing that happened then? And that worked. So they were like, really like, and then they were able, because they didn't have the chance to see me and they only heard my voice and I was pretending to be Uudu. So they were watching directly into the lens and just talking as they would be talking with Uudu. And of course you can see in the film still that they are a bit like stiff or like it is a strange thing, but I think actually it's a good thing, because if you're meeting a ghost, then you should be not that natural. So in that way it worked. So it was all pre-written and I introduced them what we are going to shoot and what's the topic and what they are supposed to say. But as it was based on their own stories, they didn't have to learn it by heart, because they knew the story. And there was this room to improvise. So because we both knew the improvisation, so that's how it worked. Basically, I was just pretending to be Uudu behind the wall.
I don't know if Fernando wants to mention anything about this collective exercise. Maybe if there is any, what are the strengths? I believe you already mentioned some of them, or if there is any risk of going that route. I believe, in my personal view, that this increases the layers of meaning on a film. But I just want to know if Fernando wants to dig in a little bit more on this idea.
Well, I guess every filmmaker would be able to say how they approach the particular risks that kind of approach means for a project. So, I mean, every project that takes people's real lives and real experiences and lived memories, has to be very careful about the way that it uses them to tell a story. I'm not saying that it's not ethic or whatever to use real real stories to tell even fantastic narratives, but as regards this kind of filmmaking that is attempting to tell this truth about how life was at a period in history and how these people live with that memory and with that legacy and with that sense of what they lost and what they've gained and how they've changed over the years. In this kind of film, I think it requires a very careful and tactful approach, just in the sense that you don't give the viewer the spectacle of their lives, and instead of that, that you offer them an opportunity to hear and to see what life is like in that particular corner of the world. So I guess that's my way of sort of driving around the question, in the sense that every film that is based on a collective collaboration and on a collective encounter is obviously affected by the way that these human relationships develop, and the way that the filmmaker is able to channel that energy into images and sounds and rhythms. And in that sense, I guess that the act of portraying collectivity enhances that sense that a film is an encounter between different people who perhaps otherwise would never meet, and who would never be able to tell us their stories so far away from when they actually live. I mean, I've never been to Estonia, and I don't know if I ever will. I hope I do, but I have no idea. But I already have within me a memory of Estonia. You know what I mean? Like, in the sense that this generosity and this collective act gave me the gift of knowing a little bit more about the world that we share. And I know that that sounds very naive or very romantic or so on. But I mean, doing film festivals and film screenings is a romantic act. So, especially in this moment when film is under so much pressure to become something else, to just serve the purposes of, I was going to say capitalism, but it's not even that. It's the purposes of 5 companies in the world. And just showing films and sharing films is an act that honors that generosity, that generous spirit that goes into collective filmmaking. And most films, in any case, are a collective act. Even when they're made by a single individual, the film doesn't, and I know this is skipping over decades of art theory, but the film doesn't really come to life until it's being screened and shared with an audience. That's just what I think.
Thank you, Fernando, for those thoughts. Beautiful. I wanted to ask you, Fernando, about Time in the Garden. This film has the capacity to raise our awareness about a subject through passivity, silence, and contemplation. What are the narrative elements that make a documentary with such a rhythm become so disturbing as it progresses? And based on your conversation with Tamara, which is the journalist that was involved in the production of this movie, what kind of relationships emerge in the midst of this passivity between the documentalist and the documented?
Okay, just to tackle your first question, I guess, well, every film has to develop its own language to be able to portray the reality that it's striving to convey for an audience or for different audiences. And every film has to find its own beat and its own language to connect the dots, or to help the spectator connect the dots, or to leave them perplexed, which is fine as well. And in this particular case, I think that that's sort of, I wouldn't say it's passivity at all, but there is silence and contemplation. Just in case some people here have not seen the film, this is a film about a billionaire in Georgia, in the Caucasus, who starts buying trees and uprooting them from where they originally are to plant them in a private garden that he owns in the coast of the Black Sea. So this is obviously a very violent act. This is an act of, well, obviously extractivism. It is the non plus ultra of the tourism industry. It is an act, a vulgar act of flaunting your wealth and so on. And it's very violent. I would even say that in some cases, it is a sort of desecration. I have no idea if any of the trees were extracted from a place regarded as symbolic or sacred or important for the history of the locals. But there is obviously the sense that when you remove a tree that has been there for many, many generations, you are effectively killing a web of relations and of memories and of feelings that flow towards that tree on the part of the families that live there. So when portraying such a violent act, I guess you could take many different approaches. One could be a very journalistic, very passionate denunciation of what is going on. But in this case, Salome and Tamara and the rest of the team took the approach of just letting the images speak. And the images by themselves are so unsettling and so uncomfortable and so perplexing that you, in your mind, in your inner process of watching a film, start thinking about the ways in which this violent act speaks for all the violent acts that we commit daily towards nature, but also about the specificity of what is going on in Georgia. So I guess this silence and this space allows us to feel through the images what is being done to the earth, to the soil, to the country. And what I meant by the fact, by what I said that I didn't think that passivity was there, it's because this was a very complicated process of filmmaking. As Tamara told me, and as you can read in the article published in Wimblu, it was very hard for them to get people to speak. And the authorities weren't collaborating because we don't know the extent to which this billionaire, former politician, former prime minister actually, went to in terms of perhaps bribing. I mean, I have no idea of what's the negotiation that happened between him and local authorities. And perhaps we'll never know. So it was obviously a very complicated process of telling this story. So I wouldn't regard it as passive at all. I would just say that taking that approach of silence and contemplation allows us to start feeling how rage is boiling within us before an act so mindlessly stupid and violent and vulgar. I was going to ask you an obvious question that people tend to ask when discussing documentaries. Have you shared the film with the people that are portrayed there? And if so, what did they think and how did they feel about their history being shared in the manner that you decided to tell the story?
Well, I can, I'll never know the truthful answer for this question, but what I did is that we arranged a premiere. It was a public premiere, so well, I think I asked them that if they want to see it before the premiere, but they didn't. So they all came to a big party, and it was a big thing for them because there was this local journalists and like press and everything. So they watched the film, and then we had like an after party with wine, and so I think what they enjoyed the most was the people, and they had a chance to come together. And I guess that they thought the film was boring. I have this impression. It's, they are used to watching TV, and TV offers totally different thing. So I don't think, well, if I would have asked like, what you think about the film, they would have said like, good girl, you made a good job. We loved it. But deep inside, I think that they don't think much about it, but they enjoyed the process and they enjoyed the party, and but they weren't humiliated either. So they were all happy, and we've been in contact after the film for years. So they all keep on talking to me and saying hello and still sharing their lives. So I personally would like to think that they don't hate me. So, yeah. So yeah, they didn't want to see it before the premiere, and they were happy there. And I didn't receive any claims or court proceedings after. So.
Well, I mean, that's great. I'm happy that they weren't angry or anything. But I just think it's interesting what you said, that you think that they perhaps thought that was boring, because I mean, it's always interesting.
But I don't know. Maybe it was. Of course, it was interesting for them to watch because it's their life, it's their village, and they know everybody from there. But deep inside, I think they had this like strong heartbeat, and they actually couldn't even concentrate what's been screened. I don't know. Maybe these are my thoughts. So you should.
Yeah, I guess we would have.
Most of them are dead now, so. And the ones who have survived can't, like, are maybe not that much able to talk anymore. So.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, I mean, in a way, yeah, I mean, confronting audiences with this kind of film language is always a very interesting process. But even people who are not regularly exposed to this kind of filmmaking, I believe that in the proper setting, and obviously if the film involves them as well, are very receptive to what's going on the screen. At least I've found that over the years when doing touring programs in faraway communities and so on. Obviously, it's difficult, and it's difficult to create a proper environment for that, especially here in Costa Rica, where faraway communities tend to be extremely warm and dry and uncomfortable or humid. So it's hard to get people to focus on a slow cinema piece for an hour and a half. But it also opens up possibilities for different reactions that you wouldn't get otherwise. And I much prefer that, honestly, to showing that kind of film to a bored bourgeois audience in the capital, honestly. So, I mean, I'm all for weird filmmaking, so. And also, your film is very beautiful. Like on the face of it, it's just a beautiful film. So regardless of what you think of its space or so on, or what anyone thinks, it's just a beautiful piece. Yeah, so that's what I think. I don't know if anyone has any question or comment or.
When I was in Doc Leipzig and after screening of Lembri Uudu, then there was an Italian guy who came to me after the film, and he asked me privately that what happened with this factory, that they were all working for a factory, and he didn't understand what happened with the factory. And then I understood that he doesn't have any clue about the Estonian history or the history of the Baltic states and the Soviet Union and the occupation and so on. And before this podcast started, we had a conversation with Pablo, that in Costa Rica you've never experienced, that at least your generation hasn't experienced this occupation or like other types of regimes. So I was just wondering that how easy it is to understand that this film is about people from a kolkhoz and what actually it means to them, that they were under occupation, and it wasn't occupation, and it wasn't something that they wanted to do, and they end up enjoying it, and all these like mixtured feelings. So how do you comprehend it? Do you see it as a factory, that people just lost their job in a factory? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I obviously see what you mean by the fact that, yeah, it was a sort of insensitive question, in the sense that, yeah, obviously you, especially being European, he should have known what happened in the Baltic states and what was going on in this very recent history, obviously. But I also wonder whether what he was doing was connecting it to Italian history and to the sort of displacement and violence that has occurred toward Italian filmmakers from the 50s onwards, especially since the 70s onward. So that's interesting. And to answer your question directly, I mean, just a vague awareness of forced collectivization and the occupation of the Soviet Union, of the Baltic states, is just with that minimum sense of what that period in history was, I guess gives the viewer the opportunity to wonder. I mean, there's always the question of wondering what life was like back then, or what life is like over there now, after so many years have passed, and after an entire generation, our generation, because I think we're very similar in age, has lived without the idea of the Soviet Union, or the idea of that kind of violence and oppression and so on. So it gives us an opportunity to answer that very basic, even childish question that always awakens a sense of curiosity in people. That is, what was life like back then? And just that very simple question, I think, opens the doors to understanding a film like yours. And obviously, if you are much more acquainted with European history and so on, you will be more receptive to what's going on screen.
Funny, just a funny remark, maybe it's a stupid remark, but when I was just formulating this question about occupation, then in my head I was thinking that no, occupation is a job. It's a wrong word. No. Then I realized that actually occupation as a job and occupation as a Russian occupation, it's kind of the same stem. So yeah, there's a connection between occupation as a job and then an occupation by a regime. That's why I don't like to work. Feeling occupied by a regime. Sorry, just
if I may jump into that, like just to add to what Fernando was saying and to your question, Eeva, I think that it's great because at the beginning of the film you give some information. You know, you sort of like frame the film that we're about to see, but then you leave it open because it's not about that. You know, you weren't making a film about Soviet occupation. You were making a film about these people and like how they lived through it. And so I think it's beautiful because it opens up enough questions that if I have that curiosity and I want to know what was the context of this film, then I just I can look it up later, you know, and then sort of add these layers to the film. But if I don't have that curiosity, I still get the experience of the life of these characters. So in a way, I think it's like, maybe the film doesn't give me enough context that I completely understand what was the situation of these characters. But at the same time, I don't think it's necessary to like connect with the characters and their situations, because as Fernando pointed out, you know, there's it's done with so much like empathy and generosity for their lives that you just get to get this experience. I also had a question, because I think at the moment we don't have anyone with a question. But I think, and it's for both of you, because in a way you both oscillate between fiction and documentary, and the line has become so thin, right? Like what do you call fiction? What do you call nonfiction? And so for Eeva, I just wanted to ask about what has been your experience on working on both sides of that definition, right? If you're moving from fiction to nonfiction, like where do you draw the line to call something a documentary or to call something fiction, right? And for Fernando, it's a similar question, because I've always really liked the fact that the festival here in Costa Rica, which you curate, doesn't make a distinction between documentary and nonfiction. You know, you put it all together in the festival. So I'm just like curious about your thoughts about this. Yeah.
Well, I don't think well, I'm not drawing a line. I don't think I'm drawing a line. It's just, I know if I'm making a documentary or if I'm making a fiction. And if it's a fiction, then you'll use actors. Sometimes you'll use non-actors as well, but it's different. The whole process is different. You have the script and the crew is different, and the way of preparing is different. So yeah, I'm a very bad person to to ask this question, because somehow it's so clear in my head, but it's very difficult to explain. Good answer. Sorry.
Well,
Sorry,
I mean,
Fernando, you wanted to leave, but my answer was so short. I can continue talking about different things if you want.
No, I was just fixing my phone. I've heard that same reaction from so many filmmakers over the years, because I mean, in the end, a film is just a film. Categories are for academics and theorists, and many categories and many of the ways in which we classify film come more from an industry perspective and from a commercial perspective and from an awards season perspective. But I remember, I mean, I wasn't the artistic director in this festival in particular that made that decision to mix everything up, but I've been certainly doing it with a lot of intent. Yes, I don't mind distinctions between them, not only because of what I said earlier, that filmmaking practices have been mixing much more and more over the past few years, not only in our context, but also globally, but also because I just want people to enjoy a film and to approach a film for what it is. And I don't want to explain what they're supposed to think or feel or whatever. We had a wonderful film last year in the festival that I just want to mention, not only because it was my favorite film of last year, but also because of the audience reactions, which was Payal Kaparia's A Night of Knowing Nothing, which is such a beautiful film, so moving. It's about student protests in India and caste differences and a sort of love affair between people of different castes. And there's real footage, there are real events portrayed in the film, and most of what you see is real, even if staged, some of it, a little portion of it. But the love story is sort of not quite fiction, but not quite real. And in the end, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry. Why? Because the audience reaction when I spoke to some of the people in the room after the screening finished was like, I had no idea that life was like that in India at the moment, that it was so that the conflict was so strong, that young people were so uncomfortable with the way things are. And this film made me understand it. So I was like, well, that's it. That's the point of the film. I don't mind if it's real or not. So I guess that applies for every film. So away with classifications.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I wanted to share and well, thanks, Eva, because when she said that she didn't have empathy about, making films about stories about other people, and that it was a little bit egocentric to share her vision and from her dreams. I think this resounds in me. I wrote a little short story about a friend that lightning struck him, and he survived. And like, I'm a really personal friend of him, and I'm really proud about all of his journey to recovery. He had to learn how to walk again, and he's also my mentor. We're writers, and it was really difficult for me to try to write about his experience because I didn't, I was not in his body, I was not in his mind, doing all of the work and recovering from it. And it's been like such a journey for years. So I had a little bit of struggle trying to convey those feelings, but then I ended up, with this little short story about it, and I gave it to him, and I was really nervous about it. And he being a writer with so many years of writing stuff, and he said that one of the few things that has moved him and from the things that he has wrote, or the things that he has read from other people, like very, very few people, like that was one of the things that has moved him the most. And I think that if I haven't seen the film, but I'm going to, I have the link now. um it rings a bell about empathy, right? About what other people are feeling. And I think that is not egocentric at all. And that also how we see in the world and our perspective, also it's a really powerful and unique version that we can share with others. And I think that's, the most, I don't know, powerful thing that empathy can show us as human beings, that in these very hard times that we are losing our empathy and humanity and all of that. But I just want to share that, and thanks.
Well, thank you. That's very good that you shared your story, and I think you've been very, very creative that the person loved the loved the story. So I don't think it's actually that easy.
No, it's difficult. It's difficult, but
Yeah.
I tend to cry with a lot of things, and I might cry with your film. If it's sad, if it's happy, if it's, I don't know, someone hugging a dog, like a kind of entail that I personally think that I have that. And I think it's really difficult to convey that through art, through filmmaking, through writing, and all of that. So I think it's really also very powerful and beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's way easier for you if you're watching my film to start crying, because maybe you have the feeling. It doesn't have to be in my film, but to do something that you just told us, that you managed to write the story that the character was also appreciating. So that's already something. So it's a whole different thing.
Yeah, it was really beautiful. I think it made sense to share it a little bit here. But thanks.
Yeah, but thank you for sharing. It's very uplifting. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Eva, as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to like comment. Okay, Adi.
No, I was just going to say about what Sarah just said, that it opens a question about vulnerability. And I think about before we started the session, you were saying something about being brave, about filming. And also Fernando brought up this about how the film gets in a way complete when it's screened, when it's shared with others. And I don't know, maybe Eva, you can tell us a bit about what's your experience with this vulnerability of actually getting to this point to share the film, especially when you're coming from a place as intimate as your dreams and your feelings and your experience. There's like you might again call it like egocentric, but at the same time it's very generous in the sense that you're giving out a lot of yourself when you expose this film. So I was wondering about this.
Yeah, but it's a different thing if you have this idea coming to you from cosmos through your dreams, or if there's a person contacting you with his or her problem. And I think Sarah just told a very similar story what I had. I don't know the backstory, that whether she was contacted or not, or how did they get to that point. But with my recent film, I was contacted to make a film about a very, very difficult situation that the woman who contacted me, she had stage 4 cancer, and she knew that she's going to live only for maximum 4 months. And she had a court case that she was also fighting for her daughter's custody right. Well, it's like overwhelming, this story. And then she had she had a son and daughter, and when she got this diagnosis, she was separated from her daughter because an Iranian man took her daughter away, and so on. So it's a difficult story, and so much happened in her life, and it was so important and so huge and so sad, and I felt so armless. Like I was just standing there. She was not able to move much. She was just lying on a sofa and telling me these stories, and she was so like tired, and I saw that she's going to pass away, and I just didn't know what to do. I was just there with the camera because she wanted me to record her story, and nothing was happening there in her apartment. She was just lying on the sofa and just wanting me to make this film. And then I was really, really struggling because there was like nothing visual there. And I only had a feeling that I have to, well, she didn't want me to feel sorry, but it was such a terrible situation to be in. And I didn't have these connections because, I don't know. Well, my grandfather died because of cancer, but he was old, and this was all different because she was only 38. So then I really, really had this feeling that I cannot understand film-wise what should I do? Like how should I shoot it? How should I show her situation? I was just there in her room talking to her and trying to shoot something. And then I had this feeling that I shouldn't make films if they don't come to me through Cosmos or through my dreams, because otherwise I'll end up facing so important situations, like very, very difficult feelings and people with their real life problems, and I just don't know how to shoot this film. So yeah, and I would love her to be alive and send me this letter that she appreciates what I did, but I never get it. So yeah, it's that's why I'm saying, Sarah, that you were so lucky to receive this feedback.
If you want to support our project, you can share this episode, visit our digital magazine wimblu.com, subscribe to our newsletter, or join our Patreon community where you can access exclusive content starting at $3 a month. Your support allows us to create and share content that reimagines a fair and healthy world for all life forms.